The Galactic Council chamber stretched across 3 kilometers of polished obsidian, its vaulted ceiling disappearing into artificial stars that mimicked the of 1,000 species. Ambassador stood at the human delegation's modest table, his weathered hands gripping a small metallic object that caught the light like a promise of death. "You want to know about human warfare?" asked, his voice carrying across the vast space without amplification. The chamber fell silent. Even the gas beings stopped their constant whistling, their translucent forms hovering motionless above their crystalline seats. High Chancellor of the Hegemony leaned forward from his elevated throne, his 4 arms spread in what his species considered a gesture of dismissal. The reptilian overlord's scales caught the chamber's light, creating an intimidating display that had cowed lesser species for. "Human, your species' primitive concepts of conflict are hardly relevant to civilized discourse. We are here to discuss your world's integration into our protection network." Rotated the small object between his fingers. The other delegates could see it now, a single bullet, its brass casing worn smooth by decades of handling. This belonged to Staff Sergeant James Riley, United States Marine Corps, 23 years old when he died on 442B. The delegation exchanged glances through their compound eyes. They had been present at 442B. The memory was not pleasant. "Your son," continued, his gray eyes finding golden ones across the distance, "thought humans would make excellent slaves. He landed on 442B with 40,000 hegemony shock troops, expecting to harvest our colonists like grain." Chancellor's tail lashed behind his throne. Princeton was performing lawful integration procedures according to Galactic Code 7 Alpha. Your colonists were illegally settled beyond approved boundaries. "Illegally settled," turned the bullet over again. "Funny thing about humans, Chancellor, we don't much care about your boundaries when we're building homes for our children." The chamber's environmental systems hummed softly as walked toward the center of the floor. His boots clicked against the obsidian with military precision. Behind him, the 12 other human delegates remained seated, their faces carved from stone. "James Riley was a sniper," said. "Not the biggest Marine, not the strongest, but he could put a round through a target at 2,000 meters in a hurricane. When your son's forces landed, James was visiting his 8-year-old daughter at the colony school." Ambassador of the Ethereal Collective shimmered with concerned energy patterns. Her species had observed human military actions before, always with a mixture of fascination and horror. "Ambassador, perhaps we should focus on future cooperation rather than past conflicts." Stopped walking. "Past conflicts? James Riley's daughter Sarah is still alive. She's 19 now, studying xenobiology at NU. Every day she lives with the memory of watching hegemony soldiers burn her school while she hid in the supply closet." The trade representative's tentacles writhed nervously. His species had profitable arrangements with the hegemony, and this conversation was making him uncomfortable. Surely the human military response was adequate to the situation. "Oh, it was adequate," said, and for the first time he smiled. The expression was not pleasant. "James Riley spent 3 days stalking your son's command post through the forests, 3 days while hegemony troops hunted human civilians for sport." High Chancellor rose from his throne, his massive frame casting shadows across the chamber floor. "You dare speak of my son's death with pride? Princeton was a warrior of noble birth, slain by cowardly ambush." Held up the bullet so the light caught its surface. "This round went through your son's head at 2,847 meters. Clean shot, right between the eyes. James Riley fired it from a ridge the hegemony scouts had declared impossible to reach." The chamber erupted in shocked whispers and angry chittering. The delegates, their faces twitching with remembered fear, began rapid communication through pheromone releases. They remembered the terror that had swept through their forces when Princeton's head exploded in a spray of blue blood. "The prince was in full battle armor," snarled. "Hegemony combat suits are rated against all known kinetic weapons." "All known alien kinetic weapons," corrected. "Human ammunition tends to be special." James Riley loaded his own rounds. Depleted uranium core, tungsten penetrator, shaped charge behind a ceramic sabot. Old Earth technology, refined by 3 centuries of humans finding new ways to kill things that want to kill us. Ambassador pulsed with confusion patterns. But surely one human warrior could not have significantly impacted a full hegemony division. Looked at her directly. One human warrior didn't. James Riley died 20 minutes after he took that shot. Hegemony artillery found his position and turned the ridge into glass. But you know what's funny about human warfare, Ambassador? We don't fight for glory. We don't fight for conquest. We fight so our children can live in a universe that doesn't want to enslave them. The silence stretched across the chamber like a held breath. Continued walking, the bullet still catching the light between his fingers. When the hegemony orbital bombardment began, he said conversationally, our colonists had 17 minutes to reach the emergency shelters. 17 minutes while hegemony ships rained fire on civilian targets. You want to know what humans did in those 17 minutes? No one answered, but every being in the chamber leaned forward. Sarah Riley's teacher, Mrs. No Relation, carried 14 children to safety while the building burned around her. Lost her left arm to falling debris, kept going. Tom Martinez, the colony's head of agriculture, died holding a blast door closed so 43 families could reach the underground tunnels. Maria Santos, our chief medical officer, performed emergency surgery on 7 wounded civilians while hegemony shells shook the hospital foundation. Stopped at the exact center of the chamber beneath the artificial stars. And while all this was happening, James Riley was reloading. He had 19 rounds left in his kit, 19 bullets and 37 hegemony officers visible from his position. High Chancellor scales had begun to show stress patterns, shifting from deep green to angry orange. Your warrior's sacrifice was meaningless. The hegemony forces completed their mission. Did they? Asked. Because from where I stand, the hegemony forces suffered 73% casualties and retreated from human space with their tails between their legs. Your son died for nothing, Chancellor. But James Riley, he saved 812 human lives with 1 bullet. The representative's tentacles had gone completely still. Surely you cannot claim victory. The human colony was destroyed. The colony infrastructure was destroyed, agreed. But the colonists lived. Every single civilian made it to the shelters, and when hegemony forces tried to breach those shelters, they found something interesting. He held the bullet higher, and the chamber lights seemed to focus on its worn surface. They found that humans had been preparing for your arrival for 6 months. Every shelter was a fortress. Every tunnel was a killing ground. Every colonist was armed and trained and absolutely furious about having their homes attacked. The delegates had begun producing fear pheromones in quantities that required the chamber's atmospheric processors to increase filtration. Their species had been present during the shelter assaults. They remembered. The siege lasted 8 days, continued. 8 days of hegemony forces trying to dig out humans who had nowhere to run and nothing to lose. Do you know what we call that kind of fighting, Chancellor? His voice was barely controlled. Terrorist resistance. We call it Tuesday, said flatly. Every human child learns basic combat skills before their 10th birthday. Every human civilian knows how to shoot, how to hide, how to build explosives from household chemicals. We don't have a warrior class because we don't need one. Every human is a warrior when push comes to shove. The chamber's environmental systems struggled to process the cocktail of stress chemicals being released by various species. The artificial stars above flickered as power was diverted to life support systems. On day 9, said, Hegemony Orbital Command received a transmission from Earth, a simple message: return our people unharmed or face the consequences. Your Hegemony Council chose to ignore that message. Ambassador pulsed with urgent query patterns. What happened on day 10? Looked at the bullet one last time, then closed his fist. Admiral Sarah, no relation to the ambassador, had been in deep space patrol when the 442B crisis began. The message from Earth Command reached her 47 light-years from the colony system, transmitted through quantum entanglement relays that every alien understanding of physics. All human forces condition Crimson, hegemony assault on 442B, rules of engagement unlimited, authorization total warfare protocols. God have mercy on their souls. Sarah stared at the message display for 37 seconds before activating the ship-wide communication system. Around her on the bridge of the UES Righteous Fury, 230 human officers waited for orders they all knew were coming. Ladies and, Sarah announced, her voice carrying the weight of 3 decades in space, the hegemony just made the biggest mistake in galactic history. They attacked human civilians. The bridge crew's reaction was immediate and terrifying. Not panic, not rage, cold, professional excitement. Master Chief began checking weapons systems with the enthusiasm of a child unwrapping birthday presents. Lieutenant started calculating orbital mechanics for maximum kinetic impact. Commander activated communication protocols that would coordinate with every human military unit within 50 light years. "Ma'am," reported, his hands dancing across tactical displays, "the Hegemony Task Force consists of 1 dreadnought, 4 heavy cruisers, 12 destroyers, and approximately 40 support vessels. Estimated total crew, 200,000. Sarah nodded, "And our response force?" 18 human vessels converging on 442B from 6 different patrol sectors. Total crew complement, 8,400 personnel. The observer aboard the Righteous Fury, a diplomatic exchange officer, chittered nervously through his translator. "Admiral, surely those numbers indicate the impossibility of successful engagement. Hegemony ships are individually superior to human vessels." Sarah turned to look at the alien, her expression neutral. "Observer Eth, how long have you been stationed with human forces?" 6 months, Admiral." "Then you've never seen us angry before." The jump to hyperspace took 36 hours. During that time, every human ship in the responding fleet underwent what military manuals euphemistically called full combat preparation. What it actually meant was the systematic conversion of exploration and patrol vessels into instruments of focused destruction. On the Righteous Fury, Chief Engineer and her team worked continuously to modify the ship's industrial fabricators. Within 12 hours, the fabrication bays were producing ammunition that existed nowhere in official human military catalogs. Rounds with exotic matter cores, missiles with miniaturized fusion warheads, and projectiles designed specifically to penetrate hegemony armor. "Ma'am," reported to Admiral during hour 18 of the journey, "the boys in fabrication have been creative. We've got smart rounds that can track targets through 3-dimensional evasive maneuvers, armor-piercing shells with delayed detonation fuses, and some experimental ordnance that I probably shouldn't describe over open communication." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Experimental?" "Let's just say the physics department at New Tokyo University published some interesting papers on exotic matter manipulation last year. Turns out their theories have practical military applications." Observer Eth's compound eyes tracked the conversation with increasing alarm. "Admiral, surely human military doctrine prohibits the deployment of untested weapons in combat situations." "Observer," Sarah replied without looking away from his report, "human military doctrine prohibits exactly one thing: losing when civilians are in danger." The Hegemony Task Force was conducting what their operations manual classified as standard integration procedures when 18 human ships dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the 442B system. On the bridge of the dreadnought Eternal Glory, Fleet Admiral received the tactical report with the same board efficiency he'd shown throughout the operation. 18 primitive vessels, his tactical officer reported through mandible clicks. Configuration suggests exploration and patrol functions, no significant threat to the fleet. Barely glanced at the display. Signal the human vessels, standard surrender protocols. If they comply immediately, we'll allow them to evacuate their civilians under supervision. The response from the human fleet was not what any hegemony officer expected. "Hegemony Fleet, this is Admiral Sarah of the United Earth Forces. You are hereby ordered to withdraw from this system immediately and surrender all officers responsible for attacking human civilians. You have 30 seconds to comply." The bridge of the Eternal Glory erupted in what passed for hegemony laughter, a sound like grinding metal. Fleet Admiral activated his response communicator. "Human Admiral, your position is untenable. We outnumber your forces by more than 3 to 1, and our individual vessels are far superior to your primitive technology. Stand down immediately or face destruction." The reply came exactly 30 seconds later, not from Admiral, but from every human ship simultaneously. "Wolverines." Observer Eth had been monitoring human military communications for 6 months, but he had never heard that particular code word. "Admiral, what does Wolverines signify?" Sarah's smile was the most frightening thing they had ever witnessed. "It means we're about to show the galaxy why humans don't make empty threats." The first salvo from the human fleet every known principle of space combat. Instead of traditional energy weapons or conventional missiles, the 18 human ships launched what appeared to be simple kinetic projectiles. The hegemony tactical computers dismissed them as primitive and ineffective. That assessment lasted exactly 4.7 seconds. The projectiles were moving at 17% of light speed when they struck the outer hegemony destroyers. The impact generated so much energy that the destroyers didn't explode. They simply ceased to exist, converted to plasma by relativistic kinetic impact. 4 hegemony warships vanished from existence in less than 5 seconds. "Status report," Fleet Admiral roared, his scales shifting to combat orange. "Sir, the human projectiles appear to be equipped with exotic matter accelerators," his science officer stammered. "The kinetic energy levels are impossible according to known physics." "Nothing is impossible. Return fire immediately." The hegemony fleet's response was everything their military doctrine prescribed. Energy beams capable of melting asteroids, missiles that could track targets through hyperspace, and shield arrays that had protected hegemony forces for 1,000 years. All of it struck the human fleet with devastating precision. None of it mattered. The human ships didn't try to dodge the incoming fire. They didn't raise shields or attempt evasive maneuvers. They simply absorbed the damage and kept fighting. When hegemony energy beams struck human vessels, the beams scattered harmlessly off reactive armor that adapted to incoming energy frequencies in real time. When hegemony missiles found their targets, they detonated against hulls composed of materials that became stronger under stress. "How are they still operational?" demanded as his weapons officer reported minimal damage to the human fleet. "Sir, their hulls appear to be constructed from metamaterials that redistribute kinetic and energy impacts across the entire vessel structure. Additionally, their ships seem to have been designed specifically to absorb punishment while maintaining offensive capabilities." Observer Eth watched the tactical display with the fascination of someone witnessing impossible physics in action. "Admiral, how are your vessels surviving direct hits from hegemony capital ship weapons?" Observer, human military engineers have a saying, "If you're going to build something, build it to survive the end of the universe." We don't build ships to avoid getting hit. We build them to keep fighting after they've been hit. The second wave of human attacks came from a completely different angle. While the hegemony fleet focused on the obvious threat of the human warships, 18 smaller objects had been quietly maneuvering toward optimal positions. The hegemony sensors had classified them as debris from the initial exchange. They were wrong. The objects were human fighters, single-person craft that had been following ballistic trajectories while their pilots planned individual attack runs. When they activated their engines simultaneously, each fighter was within 50 kilometers of a different hegemony vessel. "Sir, we're detecting multiple small craft approaching at high speed," the Eternal Glory's tactical officer reported. "Fighters, destroy them immediately." The hegemony point defense systems opened fire with the mechanical precision their species was famous for. Energy beams tracked the incoming fighters with computer-guided accuracy, filling space around each target with overlapping fields of destruction. Every human fighter flew directly through the defensive fire without taking evasive action. Their pilots had calculated the precise angle and velocity needed to reach their targets, and nothing, not energy beams, not missiles, not proximity mines, was going to stop them. Each fighter carried a single weapon, a nuclear warhead with an exotic matter trigger, designed by humans who had spent 2 centuries perfecting the art of making very large explosions in very small packages. 18 nuclear detonations erupted simultaneously throughout the hegemony fleet. Warships that had survived of galactic conflicts disappeared in miniature suns that briefly the system's star. Fleet Admiral stared at the tactical display as his fleet's strength indicator dropped from 47 vessels to 19 in the space of 6 seconds. Half his task force had been eliminated by 18 humans who had flown their fighters directly into hegemony ships like guided missiles. "Sir," his communications officer reported with barely controlled panic, "we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet." "Put it through." Admiral Sarah's face appeared on the main screen, her expression calm and professional. Behind her, The bridge of the Righteous Fury showed no signs of battle damage despite having absorbed hits from 3 hegemony cruisers. "Fleet Admiral," she said conversationally, "this is your final opportunity to surrender. Withdraw your forces immediately and we'll allow you to leave human space with your remaining ships." His voice was filled with rage and disbelief. "Impossible. Our remaining forces still outnumber yours. Our weapons are more advanced. Our shields are impenetrable." Sarah's smile returned. "Admiral, you're operating under a fundamental misunderstanding. You think this is a battle between technologies. It's not. This is a demonstration of why humans don't start wars." The third wave of human attacks came from inside the hegemony ships themselves. Fleet Admiral was reviewing damage reports when his chief security officer rushed onto the bridge, scales bright yellow with alarm. "Sir, we have multiple security breaches on decks 7 through 15. Intruders have somehow penetrated our shields and hull integrity." "Impossible," snarled. "No teleportation technology exists that can penetrate hegemony defensive screens." His tactical officer looked up from his displays with confusion written across his reptilian features. "Sir, the intruders don't appear to have teleported. According to internal sensors, they've been aboard our ships for approximately 6 months." The bridge fell silent except for the hum of life support systems and the distant sound of energy weapons fire from somewhere deep within the ship. Observer Eth, monitoring communications from his diplomatic station, began chittering rapidly in his native language, a sign of extreme distress among his species. 6 months, his voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Explain." "Sir, the intruders appear to be human diplomatic personnel who were assigned to various hegemony vessels as part of the cultural exchange program. According to records, they've been functioning normally as observers and liaison officers throughout their assignments." On the main tactical display, red warning indicators appeared throughout the hegemony fleet. Ship after ship reported internal combat as humans who had been quiet observers for months suddenly revealed themselves to be something far more dangerous. Aboard the heavy cruiser Dominator's Will, cultural liaison officer Michael Torres had spent 6 months learning every detail of hegemony ship design, crew procedures, and security protocols. The reptilian crew had grown accustomed to his presence, treating him with the casual dismissal most hegemony personnel showed toward primitive species. They stopped dismissing him when he disabled the ship's main reactor with a precisely placed explosive charge he'd constructed from components in the ship's own maintenance supplies. "Security alert," the Dominator's Will emergency systems announced in flat synthetic tones. "Primary power grid compromised, switching to auxiliary systems." Captain found Torres standing calmly in the engineering section, surrounded by the bodies of 12 hegemony technicians. The human was holding what appeared to be a standard maintenance tool, but the energy signatures coming from the device suggested it had been significantly modified. "Human Torres," hissed, his hand moving toward his sidearm, "you have committed an act of war against the hegemony." Torres looked at the captain with eyes that held no emotion whatsoever. "Captain, my government warned your people to return our civilians unharmed. You chose to ignore that warning. Your civilians are insurgents. They refused lawful integration procedures." "They're 8-year-old children in a school, Captain." Torres raised his modified tool, and energy readings spiked across armor sensors. "Human children who watched their friends die because your prince wanted to test new weapons on civilian targets." The captain drew his weapon, but Torres was already moving. 6 months of observing hegemony combat techniques had taught the human exactly how their warriors fought, and more importantly, how they expected their enemies to fight. Torres didn't fight like a hegemony warrior. He didn't fight like any warrior the galaxy had seen. He fought like an angry human with nothing left to lose. The engagement lasted exactly 7 seconds. When it was over, Captain was dead, Torres had control of the ship's bridge, and the Dominator's Will was broadcasting surrender codes to the human fleet. Similar scenes played out across 19 hegemony vessels. Humans who had been diplomatic observers, cultural liaisons, and exchange officers suddenly revealed that they had been gathering intelligence and preparing for exactly this moment for months. The hegemony called it treachery. The humans called it contingency planning. Fleet Admiral watched his tactical display as ship after ship fell under human control from within. How many? He demanded. 37 human personnel were assigned to our fleet as part of various exchange programs over the past year, his intelligence officer reported. All of them appear to have been intelligence operatives. 37 humans are controlling entire warships. Sir, they're not controlling the ships directly. They've disabled critical systems and eliminated key personnel, forcing the remaining crew to choose between surrender and death. Observer Eth had been monitoring communications from multiple hegemony vessels, and what he was hearing violated every assumption his species held about human capabilities. Admiral, he transmitted to the Righteous Fury, how did human personnel manage to infiltrate so thoroughly? Hegemony security protocols are among the most advanced in the galaxy. Admiral's reply was matter-of-fact. Observer, every human who volunteers for diplomatic assignment receives basic intelligence training. We don't send anyone into potential hostile territory without teaching them how to survive and, if necessary, how to fight. But they've been functioning as normal diplomatic personnel for months. Yes, they have. They've also been mapping every system, learning every procedure, and identifying every weakness on those ships. That's what intelligence officers do. On the bridge of the Eternal Glory, Fleet Admiral faced a situation no hegemony commander had encountered in 1,000 years of galactic dominance. His fleet was being destroyed by an enemy that shouldn't have been able to challenge a single hegemony destroyer, let alone an entire task force. Sir, his communications officer announced, we're receiving a priority transmission from Hegemony Central Command. The holographic image of Supreme Chancellor Hun appeared above the bridge's central display, his ancient scales showing the deep purple coloration that indicated extreme displeasure. Fleet Admiral, explain the disaster occurring in human space. Straightened to attention, knowing his career and possibly his life depended on his response. Supreme Chancellor, we encountered unexpectedly sophisticated human resistance. Their technology appears to be far more advanced than our intelligence suggested. Advanced technology does not explain how 18 primitive vessels destroyed half your fleet. Sir, with respect, I believe our intelligence regarding human capabilities has been inadequate. Their weapons utilize exotic physics, their defensive systems adapt to incoming fire, and their personnel appear to be extensively trained for combat operations. Hun's eyes narrowed. Are you suggesting that our intelligence networks, which have successfully mapped and dominated 1,000 worlds, failed to accurately assess a single primitive species? Before could respond, the Eternal Glory's tactical officer interrupted with barely controlled panic. Sir, we're detecting massive energy signatures approaching from the edge of the system. Multiple contacts, classification unknown. The main tactical display updated to show 17 new objects entering the 442B system at faster-than-light speeds. Each contact was larger than a hegemony dreadnought, and their energy signatures were unlike anything in the galactic databases. Sir, the science officer reported, his voice filled with disbelief. The approaching vessels appear to be human in origin, but their technology readings are impossible. Admiral's voice came through the communication system, calm and professional as always. Fleet Admiral, Supreme Chancellor Hun, allow me to introduce the Earth Defense Fleet. They received news of your attack on our civilians approximately 4 hours ago. The 17 ships emerging from hyperspace were not exploration vessels or patrol craft. They were warships built by a species that had learned warfare in the most unforgiving school in the galaxy, Earth itself. For 3 centuries, humans had fought wars against each other with increasing sophistication and decreasing mercy. The ships now entering the system represented the accumulated military knowledge of a species that had perfected the art of violence. The lead vessel is the UES Retribution, Admiral continued conversationally. Earth's battleship, designed specifically for fighting enemies with superior numbers and technology. The other 16 ships represent our rapid response fleet, vessels built for the express purpose of ensuring that attacks on human civilians are met with overwhelming force. Supreme Chancellor Hun stared at the tactical display as the human ships moved into attack formation with precision that spoke of extensive training and absolute coordination. Fleet Admiral, what are your tactical recommendations? Looked at the display showing 43 hegemony vessels facing off against 35 human ships. By every measure of galactic military doctrine, the hegemony should have maintained significant advantages. Superior numbers, advanced technology of combat experience. But the hegemony had never fought humans before. "Sir," said slowly, "I recommend immediate withdrawal from the system." "Withdrawal from primitive humans." "Supreme Chancellor, with respect, these are not primitive humans. These are humans who have been planning for this exact scenario since the moment we first made contact with their species. They've studied our technology, our tactics, our psychology. They've designed weapons specifically to defeat our defenses, trained personnel specifically to fight our forces, and built ships specifically to destroy our fleet." Hun's scales shifted to deep red. "You're suggesting we retreat from a single human system." "Sir, I'm suggesting we retreat before they demonstrate why no one has ever successfully conquered Earth." The first salvo from the Earth Defense Fleet consisted of weapons that existed nowhere in hegemony intelligence files. Each of the 17 human battleships fired a single projectile, not at the hegemony fleet, but at specific points in space around the system. The projectiles detonated simultaneously, creating a network of gravity wells that effectively trapped the hegemony fleet within the system's boundaries. Any ship attempting to reach the hyperspace jump points would be caught in artificial gravitational fields that would tear it apart at the molecular level. "Sir," the Eternal Glory's science officer reported with disbelief, "the humans have created a gravity cage around the entire system. Escape is impossible without passing through artificial singularities." Observer Eth had stopped even pretending to function as a diplomatic observer. His species had never encountered technology capable of manipulating gravity on such a massive scale. "Admiral, how is this possible? Gravity manipulation requires energy levels comparable to small stars." "Observer," Admiral replied, "humans have been working on gravity manipulation for 200 years. We tend to be persistent when we're motivated, and right now we're very motivated." Fleet Admiral realized that his fleet was trapped in a system with humans who had been planning for exactly this situation. Worse, the humans weren't showing any signs of anger or bloodlust. They were conducting the destruction of his forces with the same calm professionalism they might show while conducting a training exercise. "Communications," he ordered, "signal the human fleet. Request immediate negotiation." "Sir," his communications officer replied, "we're receiving a transmission from the UES Retribution." The holographic image that appeared showed a human woman in her 60s, wearing a uniform that was functional rather than ceremonial. Her gray hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and her eyes held the calm confidence of someone who had never lost a battle. "Fleet Admiral Supreme Chancellor Hun," she said formally, "I am Admiral Elizabeth Harper, commanding the Earth Defense Fleet. You are hereby ordered to surrender your remaining vessels immediately." Hun's image sputtered with indignation. "Admiral Harper, you cannot simply demand surrender from a lawful hegemony fleet. We are operating under galactic law." Admiral Harper's expression didn't change. "Supreme Chancellor, you attacked human civilians. In our legal system, that makes you war criminals. The offer to surrender is a courtesy we're extending because we prefer not to leave debris fields in inhabited systems." "You cannot threaten the hegemony. We are the dominant power in this galaxy." The surrender of the hegemony fleet took exactly 14 minutes. It wasn't a negotiated surrender, with terms and conditions and diplomatic protocols. It was the kind of surrender that happened when a military force realized that continuing to fight meant certain death, while surrendering offered at least the possibility of survival. Fleet Admiral made the decision when the UES Retribution demonstrated what human weapons could do to a target that wasn't shooting back. "Fire a warning shot," Admiral Harper had ordered, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had been in command of violent situations for decades. The Retribution's main gun fired once. The projectile struck an asteroid approximately 2 kilometers in diameter that had been drifting at the edge of the system. The asteroid didn't explode or break apart. It simply vanished, converted to its component atoms by exotic matter reactions that released energy equivalent to a small nuclear weapon. "Admiral Harper," transmitted immediately, "the hegemony fleet surrenders unconditionally." "Acknowledged, Fleet Admiral. All hegemony vessels will shut down weapon systems and prepare for boarding. Any ship that fails to comply will be destroyed immediately." Observer Eth monitored the surrender proceedings with the fascination of someone witnessing a fundamental shift in galactic power structures. "Admiral," he transmitted to the righteous Fury, "what happens now? The hegemony has never been defeated in open combat." Admiral Sarah looked thoughtful. "Observer, what happens now depends entirely on whether the hegemony learns from this experience. We didn't want this fight. We just wanted to be left alone to build our colonies and raise our children. But if someone attacks our civilians, we'll respond with everything we have." "Will humanity attempt to conquer hegemony space?" "Conquer?" laughed, but the sound held no humor. "Observer, humans don't conquer, we liberate. And right now, there are approximately 4 billion sentient beings living under hegemony rule who might be interested in alternative forms of government." The boarding of the hegemony vessels was conducted with military precision that impressed even the reptilian warriors who had dominated the galaxy for. Human marines moved through hegemony ships with practiced efficiency, securing critical systems and taking command of essential functions. Aboard the Eternal Glory, Marine Captain Jennifer led a squad of 12 humans through corridors designed to intimidate species smaller than the average hegemony warrior. The architecture emphasized the reptilian size and strength, with high ceilings, massive doorways, and decorative elements that suggested predatory dominance. None of it impressed the humans. "Structural analysis complete," Sergeant reported as the squad moved toward the bridge. "Standard hegemony design, optimized for intimidation rather than defensive efficiency, multiple vulnerabilities in their internal layout." Captain nodded. "Copy that. Remember, we're not here to take prisoners, we're here to establish control. Anyone who cooperates gets treated according to the Geneva Conventions. Anyone who doesn't, well, they'll find out why human military doctrine includes specific procedures for fighting in confined spaces." The Bridge of the Eternal Glory was designed to accommodate the hegemony's hierarchical command structure, with the fleet admiral's position elevated above the other officers. When Captain and her squad entered, they found 17 reptilian officers standing at attention, their weapons placed on the deck in front of them. Fleet Admiral stepped forward, his scales showing the neutral gray that indicated formal submission. "Captain, I surrender this vessel and my fleet to human authority." Looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "Admiral, you attacked a human colony. You killed human civilians. You started a war with a species that really doesn't like it when people hurt our children." "I understand human displeasure," replied carefully, "but I was following legitimate orders under galactic law." "Admiral," said conversationally, "let me explain something about human military doctrine. We don't recognize any authority higher than the safety of human civilians. Your galactic law, your hegemony orders, your supreme chancellor, none of that matters when you're threatening our families." She gestured toward the tactical displays that still showed the human fleet maintaining perfect formation around the trapped hegemony vessels. "You see those ships? Each one represents about 10,000 humans who volunteered to die rather than let attacks on our colonies go unanswered. And every one of those humans has friends and family back on Earth who are really angry about what happened on 442B. Observer Eth had been monitoring communications throughout the fleet, and the conversations he was hearing challenged every assumption his species held about human psychology. "Captain," he transmitted from his position on the bridge, "will humanity seek revenge against the hegemony?" Looked at the observer with something that might have been sympathy. "Observer, humans don't seek revenge, we prevent future attacks. There's a difference." "I do not understand the distinction." "Revenge is about the past. Prevention is about the future." Turned back to Admiral. "Admiral, your species has been the dominant military power in this galaxy for 1,000 years. You've conquered dozens of worlds, enslaved entire civilizations, and treated other species as resources to be harvested. That ends now." Scales shifted to orange, indicating confusion and concern. "Captain, surely you don't expect humanity to maintain control over hegemony space. Your forces are impressive, but the hegemony encompasses over 100 star systems." "Admiral, you're still thinking like a conqueror. Humans don't want to control hegemony space. We want to ensure that the people living in hegemony space have the opportunity to control themselves." Back in the Galactic Council chambers, Ambassador was still holding Staff Sergeant James Riley's bullet when the reports from 442B reached the assembled delegates. The chamber fell silent as the tactical reports detailed the complete surrender of the hegemony fleet. High Chancellor had remained on his throne throughout the battle reports, his scales cycling through colors that indicated shock, rage, and finally, resignation. "Ambassador," he said slowly, "what are humanity's terms for the return of our fleet?" Looked at the bullet one more time, then placed it carefully on the table in front of him. "Chancellor, humanity's terms are simple. Full reparations to the families affected by the 442B attack, immediate cessation of all aggressive actions against human colonies, and complete restructuring of hegemony military doctrine to prohibit attacks on civilian populations." Impossible. The Hegemony Council will never agree to such terms. Then the Hegemony Council will find themselves explaining to their people why their entire military force was destroyed by a species they considered primitive. Looked around the chamber, making eye contact with delegates from dozens of species. Unless, of course, other members of the Galactic Council would like to test human military capabilities for themselves. The silence that followed was broken only by the environmental systems processing the stress chemicals being released by various species. The trade representatives' tentacles were completely still. The ethereal collective's ambassador had dimmed to barely visible energy patterns. Even the gas beings of Zephyr had stopped their constant movement. Ambassador of the ethereal collective was the first to speak. "Ambassador, what does humanity want from the galactic community?" Considered the question carefully. "Ambassador, humanity wants exactly what we've always wanted, to be left alone to build our civilization in peace. We don't want to rule other species. We don't want to impose our values on alien cultures. We just want to ensure that no one else decides to test their weapons on human children. And if other species choose to ignore human warnings." Picked up the bullet again, turning it over in his weathered hands. "Ambassador, this bullet represents one human soldier who died protecting 800 civilians. Staff Sergeant James Riley saved more lives with one shot than most warriors save in entire careers." He looked directly at High Chancellor. "But James Riley was just one Marine. Earth has trained millions more just like him, and every one of them carries bullets just like this one." The chamber's artificial stars flickered as power was diverted to enhance the environmental systems. The cocktail of fear chemicals being released by the assembled delegates was reaching levels that required active filtration. "The difference," continued, "is that James Riley's bullet was fired in defense. The next bullets might be fired in prevention. And I promise you, delegates of the Galactic Council, that you don't want to find out what happens when humans decide to prevent future attacks on our civilians." Observer Eth transmitted a final report to his species as the council session drew to a close. His message was brief and factual, but its implications would reshape galactic politics for centuries to come. Human military capabilities exceed all previous estimates by several orders of magnitude. Species appears to have been deliberately concealing true technological advancement and strategic thinking. Recommend immediate diplomatic overtures and absolute avoidance of hostile action against human interests. The age of hegemony dominance has ended. The age of human deterrence has begun. In the depths of space around 442B, the human fleet maintained perfect formation as hegemony prisoners were processed and damaged vessels were secured. Admiral Elizabeth Harper stood on the bridge of the UES Retribution, watching repair crews work to restore the colony infrastructure below. "Ma'am," Commander Torres reported, "final casualty reports from the surface. 812 civilians survived the attack. No human military personnel were lost during the rescue operation." Harper nodded, but her expression remained grim. "And hegemony losses. Approximately 40,000 personnel killed or wounded, 37 ships destroyed or disabled. Complete military defeat across all engagement parameters. Any word from Earth Command on long-term strategy?" Torres consulted his tactical display. "Ma'am, we've received orders to establish a permanent fleet presence in human space. Intelligence reports suggest that news of the hegemony defeat is spreading rapidly throughout the galaxy. Other species are reassessing their relationship with humanity." Admiral Harper looked at the tactical display showing the captured hegemony fleet. 43 warships that had represented the pinnacle of galactic military power, now under human control. "Commander, send a message to all human colonies and outposts. Text only, wide distribution. Yes, ma'am, message content. Harper was quiet for a moment, thinking about Staff Sergeant J6 months later. The galaxy had learned to fear the sound of human ships dropping out of hyperspace. High Chancellor stood in the ruins of what had once been the hegemony's greatest military academy, watching human engineers work with former hegemony personnel to rebuild the facility according to new specifications. The sight was deeply unsettling, not because of the destruction, but because of how efficiently humans and reptilians were working together. Chancellor, his aide reported nervously, the human delegation has arrived for the final treaty negotiations. Nodded, his scales showing the muted blue that indicated resignation. 6 months of human occupation had taught the hegemony many things, most importantly that humans were far more dangerous when they were being helpful than when they were being hostile. Ambassador entered the chamber carrying the same worn briefcase he had brought to the Galactic Council. But now he was accompanied by a small entourage that included military advisors, diplomatic staff, and one figure that made every hegemony guard in the room tense with barely controlled fear. Sarah Riley, age 19, walked with the confident stride of someone who had grown up in a universe that no longer considered humans easy targets. She wore the simple blue uniform of a civilian consultant, but every hegemony soldier present knew exactly who she was. She was the daughter James Riley had died protecting. Chancellor, Ambassador said formally, thank you for hosting these negotiations. I believe we can finalize the terms of our agreement today. Gestured toward the conference table with one of his forearms. Ambassador, the Hegemony Council has reviewed your proposals. Most of our leadership finds the terms acceptable. Most. There are those who believe the hegemony should resist human demands, regardless of the consequences. Sarah Riley spoke for the first time, her voice carrying the calm certainty of someone who had seen the very worst the universe could offer and survived. Chancellor, with respect, the galaxy tried resistance 6 months ago. How did that work out? Looked at the young human woman who had become the symbol of everything the galaxy now feared about humanity. Not because she was particularly dangerous herself, but because she represented what humans were willing to do to protect their children. Miss Riley, he said carefully, the hegemony understands that humanity is motivated by protective instincts. Motivated? Sarah's eyes hardened. Chancellor, my father died on 442B because your son thought human children would make interesting target practice. That's not motivation, that's justice. She placed a small object on the conference table. Every being in the room recognized it immediately, the brass casing from the bullet that had killed Prince N. The same casing Ambassador had carried to the Galactic Council. This belonged to Staff Sergeant James Riley, United States Marine Corps, Sarah said, her voice carrying across the chamber with the same authority her father's rifle had carried across 2,000 meters of alien forest. He saved 812 human lives with one shot, but more importantly, he taught the galaxy a lesson about the consequences of threatening human civilians. Scales shifted to orange. Miss Riley, surely you understand that military conflicts sometimes involve civilian casualties. The hegemony forces were following standard integration procedures. Standard integration procedures? Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout. Chancellor, let me tell you about human integration procedures. She activated a holographic display that showed the current status of former hegemony territories. The images revealed something that challenged every assumption the galaxy had held about human intentions. In the 6 months since the 442B incident, Sarah continued, humanity has established administrative control over 47 former hegemony worlds. Would you like to know what we've done with them? The holographic display updated to show detailed statistics from each world. The numbers were staggering and completely unexpected. 442B has been rebuilt with infrastructure superior to anything the hegemony ever provided. The colony now supports 12,000 residents, including 400 hegemony refugees who requested asylum from human authorities. Mortality rates have dropped by 60%, educational opportunities have increased by 300%, and economic productivity has risen by 400%. Stared at the display with confusion written across his reptilian features. I don't understand. Why would humans improve conditions for hegemony civilians? Sarah looked at him as if he had asked why water was wet. Because that's what decent people do, Chancellor. When we take responsibility for someone's safety, we actually protect them. The display cycled through additional worlds, each showing similar patterns. Improved infrastructure, enhanced medical care, expanded educational opportunities, and economic development that benefited all species present. But here's what really confuses your leadership, Sarah continued, and what should terrify them. We're not doing this because we want to rule the galaxy. We're doing this because it's the most effective way to ensure that no one ever again decides to test their weapons on human children. Ambassador stepped forward, placing a formal document on the conference table. Chancellor, the final treaty terms are simple. The hegemony formally acknowledges human sovereignty over all territories currently under human administration. In exchange, humanity guarantees the safety and rights of all hegemony civilians living in those territories. And military restrictions. The hegemony military will be limited to defensive operations only. No expansion, no conquest, no integration procedures involving unwilling populations. Any violation will result in immediate human intervention. Looked at the document with the expression of someone signing his own death warrant. Ambassador, these terms essentially end the hegemony as a galactic power. No, Chancellor. These terms end the hegemony as a galactic threat. Your people are welcome to build whatever civilization they want, as long as it doesn't involve attacking others. Sarah Riley picked up the bullet casing again, turning it over in her hands exactly as her father had done in his final moments on 442B. Chancellor, my father didn't want to be a hero. He just wanted to visit his daughter at school. Your son took that choice away from him. She placed the casing back on the table. But my father's death taught humanity something important about our place in the galaxy. We learned that we can't trust other species to leave us alone. So we're going to make sure they don't have the capability to threaten human civilians ever again. The treaty signing took place in the same chamber where Princeton had planned the assault on 442B. The symbolism was intentional, and every being present understood the message being sent. As High Chancellor signed the document that formally ended 1,000 years of hegemony dominance, Sarah Riley stood at the chamber's main window, looking out at the stars where human ships now patrolled routes that had once been controlled by reptilian warlords. Miss Riley, Observer Ed approached carefully, his compound eyes reflecting the starlight. May I ask what humanity plans for the future? Sarah didn't look away from the stars. Observer, humans plan to do what we've always done. Build homes, raise families, explore new worlds, and advance our civilization. The only difference is that now, anyone who threatens those goals will discover exactly how creative humans can be when we're properly motivated. And the other species of the galaxy. The other species are welcome to join us in building a better universe, or they can maintain their own civilizations in peace. The choice is theirs. She finally turned to look at the diplomat. But if anyone chooses to repeat the hegemony's mistake. She let the sentence hang in the air, unfinished but perfectly clear. 3 years after the 442B incident, Ambassador retired from diplomatic service and returned to Earth. On his final day in the Galactic Council, he placed Staff Sergeant James Riley's bullet on permanent display in the chamber's Memorial Hall. The inscription read, "In memory of all beings who died protecting others, in warning to all beings who would threaten the innocent." The bullet remained there for decades, becoming the most visited artifact in galactic history. Beings from 1,000 worlds came to see the simple brass casing that had changed the balance of power throughout the known universe. And in the human colonies scattered across dozens of star systems, children grew up learning about Staff Sergeant James Riley, not as a warrior or a hero, but as a father who had done what any human parent would do when their child was threatened. They learned that sometimes, one person with the right motivation could save hundreds of lives with a single action. They learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite fear when others needed protection. And they learned that the galaxy was full of beings who would test humanity's resolve, but who would discover, always too late, that humans meant exactly what they said when they promised to protect their own. Sarah Riley, now Dr. Sarah Riley, professor of relations at New University, ended every lecture on galactic politics with the same reminder. Peace is not the absence of conflict. Peace is the presence of justice, and justice sometimes requires that good people be willing to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. Her students, human and alien alike, always listened carefully to those words, because they understood that Dr. Riley wasn't just teaching history. She was teaching the future. The brass casing that had once held the bullet that killed Prince and still sits in the Galactic Council Memorial Hall. Visitors often ask their guides about its significance, and the answer is always the same. That bullet represents the moment the galaxy learned that humans don't start wars. But when wars are started against us, we finish them, and we make sure they never start again. Some call it a threat, others call it a promise. Humans call it Tuesday Ames Riley and 800 civilians who had survived because one Marine was willing to die for his daughter's future. The message is simple, Commander. The galaxy is a dangerous place, but it just got a lot safer for humans. Admiral Harper corrected gently. You were the dominant power. That status ended the moment you decided to find out what happens when you kill human children. She leaned forward slightly. We end them, Day 10 was when your species learned why humans don't start wars, we finish them.